Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Northeastern University Charlotte campus. For how many of you is this your first visit to our campus? See a lot of new faces. Allow me to do a couple introductions and tell you a little bit about the campus before we start our program today. My name is Cheryl Richards, and I have the pleasure of serving as the CEO and Regional Dean of this campus of Northeastern University. Many of you may know the name Northeastern University as a 115-year-old institution based in Boston. Mara here is one of our students out of the Boston campus who is living in Charlotte on co-op. Doing a co-op with Clean Air Carolinas. And that's really one of the signatures of a Northeastern University experience, is that we ask our students to come to Boston, but then we ask them to leave Boston and go experience the world by way of 6-month work experiences where they integrate their academic studies with real work experience and figure out what it's like to actually apply their learning in a real setting. So our co-op experience, we're glad to have Mara here as one of our students. She'll be leaving us to go back to Boston this semester. We bring students to the Charlotte area from our Boston campus. We also offer classes here in Charlotte for graduate students, and we have several of our students in the audience. Raise your hand. See a few students here in our Masters of Sports Leadership program, as well as our Master in Leadership program. And we opened our doors here in Charlotte about 16 months ago, offering 8 master's degrees that were very industry targeted for the sectors that support the areas in the Carolinas. You are among the first group audience to hear that this week we are announcing the addition of 9 additional graduate degree programs. 7 of those are master's degree programs, and 2 of those are doctoral programs. And they are the first 2 doctoral programs that have been approved through the North Carolina system for an institution that is not permanently residenced in North Carolina. So great accomplishment for us in just the 16 months we've been open here in Charlotte. Beyond our students, we have a very strong commitment to the Charlotte community, and one of those commitments, we would like to engage in dialogue around things that are of importance to our community. So about 7 months ago, we started this series called Local Leaders Global Impact, where we pair one of our local leaders in the community with one of our global experts from our Northeastern University faculty or staff. And today, you will have the pleasure of hearing from both our local leaders and global leaders here by way of our discussion on the ethics of and role of sports in our society. So let me take a moment to introduce you to our 2 distinguished panelists who made me put on my very tall wedges today so that I could stand next to them, 2 former basketball players there. Many of you know Fred Whitfield. Fred is the president and COO of the Charlotte Bobcats Sports and Entertainment. Something.
That's correct.
Is that right? I got you. Sports and entertainment, not just the Charlotte Bobcats. Many of you know Fred has had a strong commitment to our community, not just by way of the Bobcats, but also many of the events that happen at the Time Warner Cable Arena, which they also manage and operate there. Prior to joining the Bobcats, though, did a little stint there with Jordan Jordan Apparel, and also has held positions with the Washington Wizards and as Director of Player Development for Nike Basketball. Fred actually is Dr. Fred, if we were to be formal about this, because he holds his JD degree from North Carolina Central University School of Law. Also, obviously, has his bachelor's and master's degree. And Fred's wife is an alum of our MBA program. I always like to say that. So we love having you here. Thank you. Thanks, Fred, for joining. He couldn't tell me no. Could not tell me no. Thank you. No, seriously, Fred, appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Let me introduce you to Peter Roby. Peter Roby is our athletic director at Northeastern University, and prior to that role was the director of our Center for Sports in Society, which Peter can talk at length about in his discussion, in his comments today. The Center for Sport and Society is really about making positive social change in the world using sports as a vehicle. So very timely and very appropriate for our conversation today on the ethics and the role of sports in our society. Like Fred, Peter had a career outside of athletics and worked with Reebok, and also was the vice president of marketing there at Reebok. Peter recently came out of what we call sequester or witness protection, as you might call it. He recently served on the NCAA selection committee for the basketball tournament. So we're glad to have you out and in Charlotte, Peter.
I had influence there, but not on the FAA. So if your flights are delayed, that sequester has nothing to do with me.
Exactly. Those of you may know our media personality here by his picture in the Business Journal. Needs no introduction. Eric Spanberg. Thank you, Eric, for moderating yet another discussion. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, these guys wanted us to sit down because my height can be intimidating, as everyone knows. Try and not delve into that too much.
Glad you didn't wear your wedges.
Yeah, that's right. But I look good in them. So these are, for those who've been here before, these are pretty informal, casual conversations. I'll ask a few questions and let our panelists share their expertise, and then y'all can ask the really good questions at the end. But there are a couple of things I want to just sort of take care of. One light, one not so light. It's probably not light to Fred, but can you dispel the notion that I'll be the next coach of the Bobcats? Can you take care of that, Fred?
Well, we're looking at all potential candidates.
Okay.
Don't take yourself out.
All right. So that was the big news this week. Can you offer a thought or two on what's next?
Just a thought. First, we as an organization want to thank Mike Dunlap for all that he did during the year that he was here with us, and wish him the best moving forward. We have a plan and we have a strategy to get better. I think he assisted us this year in starting to move that plan in the right direction. But after meeting with Rod Higgins, our president of basketball, and Rich Cho, our GM, decision was made to move in another direction. But our strategy of getting better has not changed. We have a young core of players. One of our players is the youngest player in the NBA, or was this year, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. He just turned 19 during the season. Bismack Biyombo is the 10th youngest player in the league. He turned 20 during the season. And those two young men will be part of our core moving forward. And when you think about our sort of elder statesman that played a lot of minutes, well, he's 24 years old, Gerald Henderson. So we've got a very young core talent. Now it's about developing and continuing to develop those players and adding pieces to it. And we'll have a top 5 pick in the draft this year and potentially another first-round pick this year. We could have as many as 3 first-round picks in next year's draft, and it's projected to be one of the strongest drafts in years. And we'll have up to $21 million of salary cap space going into this summer potentially. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and the goal is to use all of that flexibility, and Michael's made it very clear that he's willing to spend whatever it takes to put a winning team on the floor. And I'm responsible for the business operation of the organization, and we've tried to do everything we can to really put our organization in a position such that when we win, that we'll be sold out every night. And so we see brighter days ahead. But again, I would definitely like to convey our thanks to Mike Dunlap for all of his hard work over the past year.
Takeaway here is that half your roster can't get into an R-rated movie, right?
That's true.
We've
got a young team.
It is on a much more serious note. It's been about 10 days, obviously, since the Boston Marathon bombing. And Peter, your campus is located, obviously, near the site of those events. Fred, you run a building that safety and security is always on your mind. So I'm hoping that maybe both of you can offer some perspective on what's transpired and also how it affects what you do going forward. Peter, you want to start?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. We're literally right around the corner from Boylston Street. Fortunate that we didn't have more of our community impacted with the loss of life or serious injury, because it's a state holiday, and so there's no classes, and all of our students and a lot of our staff are there at the finish line or participating in the race or volunteering. And we had a few injuries, nothing life-threatening, thankfully. So we feel fortunate in one sense, and we're heartbroken. You go from being in a celebratory mood, just celebrating life and people being active and healthy, running for charities and all that sort of thing, and the next thing you know, bombs are going off and people don't know where to run, and 8-year-old children are being killed. So it's a tragedy. And so everybody's trying to heal. What it does for us is, you know, we sit in staff meetings and talk about our policies around whether people can bring bags into arenas or not, and you know, whether we're going to limit those things or not, which we've done the last couple of years. And we've gotten some people that weren't happy with us because it's an inconvenience. You know, they come from work or they're coming from somewhere and they don't have a place to leave their bag, and now they've got their bag, and what do? They got to walk back to the car, or, and we feel badly about that. And yet, when you know, we were trying to impart to people that we were trying to just maintain as much safety as we could control. And now you have this kind of incident, and it puts it all in perspective. And so, you know, you just hope that people will appreciate that the efforts that you take to protect people, even when people think, well, why in the world would we ever worry about somebody bringing a bomb into Matthews Arena? Well, why would we ever have thought that anybody would leave a bomb on the streets of Boston at the finish line of the marathon? You just never know. So.
Fred, you know, not only the 41 Bobcats games you have a year, obviously it's probably, close to 200 when you factor in concerts and other events. How, if at all, does this change your approach? And just talk a little bit about security as a general issue for you.
Well, you know, just ironically, the day of the bombing, our Deputy Commissioner, Adam Silver, happened to be visiting our arena. And as we got the news, you know, immediately, you know, a light went off in his head, and he said, wow, well, you know, we got to think about even more heightened security as we finish the regular season and get ready to go into the playoffs. But you're exactly right. You know, we run and manage Time Warner Cable Arena. Our goal is to have 200 events in our building that literally will hit every demographic, every genre of music you can imagine, every family show that we can attract, and the Democratic National Convention, which we hosted. So obviously we've been really at a high alert level coming out of the DNC, and having worked with the Secret Service, the local police, the state police, you name it, to make sure that we didn't have an incident during that time. So we really haven't backed off of most of our heavy security procedures, but we're going to be even more alert going forward. Because, you know, any given night we've got 20,000 captive, a captive audience of 20,000 people that are just there to have fun, and we want to do everything that we possibly can to try and prevent anything from happening in our building.
I'm assuming that for both of you, the big dilemma or trade-off is customer convenience and satisfaction versus how much risk is reasonable. Is that fair to say?
It is, and I mean, to Peter's point, you know, it is somewhat inconvenient for a fan not to be able to bring a bag in the arena, or to have to now walk through metal detectors, which, you know, we installed even prior to the Democratic National Convention, or the hand wands. You know, people oftentimes feel like we're being a little insensitive to their person. And, you know, fortunately, people understand that not everybody that comes into our arenas or to any venue has the best thing in mind. So our fans, and we try to do it in a very respectful way, have been very understanding, and I think appreciative that we've taken the security to a higher level.
Yeah, and the world's changed since 9/11. We all know when we go to the airport now that we have to plan accordingly, and that there are things that go on at the airports now that never used to go on. And sometimes it takes those kinds of tragedies to bring about those kinds of changes, but it's now become part of our life, and we understand it. And I think the same is true in what we do. I think people have become resigned to the fact that we're not doing it to inconvenience them, we're doing it to protect them. And when issues, incidents like the ones that happened at the marathon happen, I think everybody says, now I get it. And so I think they'll be much more forgiving with respect to that.
Let's talk a little bit about ethics in sports. Why not? That's kind of the theme. Peter, I'm going to let you start, because so much is going on in college sports and even at the NCAA itself right now. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, this vast panorama of potential problems, rules, all those things? What are the ones that give you the most sleepless nights right now?
Well, academic integrity is always going to be one that's important and a priority for me. you know, I got into this business because of the influence of my college coach when I played and how he showed me what it could look like when a coach was an educator. And he had our best interests in mind and tried to help us become the kind of men that we wanted to be. And so that's been my goal. That's been the value that we've brought to our work, is we're educators and we want to help develop young people for a life of fulfillment and achievement. And we just happen to use sport to do that. And so I want to make sure that our focus continues to be on academic integrity and getting a quality education. And it's getting harder and harder to maintain that focus when the riches become bigger and bigger. When you have conferences that are signing media rights deals that are in the billions of dollars, and that schools can go from making $15 or $16 or $20 million a year through their sports media rights to making $40 million a year, it makes them decide that they're going to leave, you know, a long-standing traditional conference where they've been a member since its founding 60-some years ago, to go to a place that most of their alums aren't located. And you know, you ask yourself, well, what's that have to do with education? And it's hard to answer that question. And so, you know, my hope is that we don't lose perspective, despite all the money that's out there to be had, and that we continue to have the focus on what's in the best interest of the student athletes.
Fred, you obviously see the finished product, these players coming out of college. What sense do you get?
18-year-old.
Right.
Finished
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I forgot half the team's 12.
Did you really just say that?
When you get the seventh grader.
You might want the right seventh grader.
That's right. What sense do you get of how players have changed, just in terms of the environment that they're coming out of, what their college experience is like if they came from college?
Well, you know, one of, I guess, the unfortunate things about players coming in our league so young is that a lot of them hadn't gotten a chance to really mature to the extent that they would if they went through a 4-year experience. But what I will say is the NBA and every team understands that and realizes that. And I think the NBA really has focused on player development and really trying to educate our young men on all phases of life and things that they need to know that maybe they would have learned later on through an educational process, or having a coach that was a father figure that spent more than 1 year with them in college. But we as an organization focus on it as well. And every team in the NBA has a player development director whose sole job is to really help these young men really understand how to matriculate through their pro careers and do it such that they can remain role models and can be a positive to the brand, not only of the organization, but their own personal brand. And so that's really important to us, and I think all the teams in the NBA.
For people who may not be familiar with the nuances, can one or both of you just maybe back up and explain what the current policy is in terms of player eligibility going into, let's take basketball, obviously, for the NBA, and what possible remedies there might be if you think some are needed?
Well, I just want to put the disclaimer out there right away that that's not an NCAA rule. So the one and done rule is not an NCAA rule. And there's a misnomer out there, or that somehow that's a rule that the NCAA has implemented, and it's not. That's a rule that came as a result of the collective bargaining agreement with the Players Association and the NBA, that a player cannot enter the NBA draft or play in the NBA unless they're 1 year removed from their graduating class in high school. And so that's why you see the kids at Kentucky or wherever that came to college for 1 year with the sole purpose of playing 1 year and going to the NBA. And you know, I don't like the rule, but I don't like the rule because I think it's unfair and it restricts a young person's right to make a living. You know, I don't see how it can be constitutional, but I guess they've vetted that well enough, and you got a lawyer here, so he could tell you more. But philosophically, I think it's a problem. If a young person's a talented enough singer that they can go out and sing and make money and support their family, or create art that gets sold and they're professional, it just seems counterintuitive to me that we would say that an 18-year-old who's talented enough to potentially play in the NBA can't go until he's 19. It feels like we're protecting the NBA and the Players Association from themselves, and they should earn their money. If they're good enough to evaluate talent and know whether a young man's mature enough to handle the rigors and the stress of the NBA, then they should draft him, and if they don't think he is, they shouldn't. But it shouldn't be up to us to have to take a kid for a year when we know that he doesn't want to be there. It just doesn't send the right message, and it, I think, leads to a lot of the issues that we have in college where people are falling all over themselves to get a kid for a year and then end up violating NCAA rules and all the other stuff that goes on. So,
Fred, what do you think about the one and done?
You know, I agree with almost everything Peter said. I just like to add that I think part of this is also to protect some of the young men that happen to think they may be good enough to go right out of high school into the pros, who may or may not have been misled by an AAU coach that didn't necessarily have that young man's best interest at heart. And I think back on a young man, Corleone Young, who was the #1 rated high school player in the country, but he was a 6'7" center. And he declared for the draft and, didn't make it, and, who knows where he is now. But Peter's exactly right. It's negotiated and collective bargaining, and if the Players Association had their way, kids would still be able to go right out of high school to the pros. And I think if the ownership group had their way, they probably want to see kids play college basketball for 4 years. So, much like every other issue that comes up in negotiation and the collective bargaining agreement, there was a compromise made, and several years ago, the decision was made to move away from high school players being able to enter the draft, and players at least do 1 year of college, and to Peter's point, 1 year away from their graduating class. So when you look at a guy like Brandon Jennings, who sort of did it a different way, who left high school and went and played overseas for a year and then entered the next draft, as long as you stay away for a year, then you can then enter the draft.
I think that maybe there's some way of replicating what goes on in baseball for the NCAA. So there is a way that the NCAA could play a role in that. If we were open-minded to the idea that if you declare for the draft as a high school senior and yet you're not drafted where you want to be drafted, or you're not drafted, that you should then be eligible again if you don't go sign to go to college.
In baseball, is it that you stay 3 years? Once you do that,
right, you have to stay for 3 years
once you enter.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do either of you think it does matter or should matter, particularly when we talk about basketball, that so many people think the college game has been watered down because of the departure of stars early? How much should that factor into a decision like that? Not for the player, but just for how the game is governed.
I don't think it has any relevance. I don't care whether there's 8 less guys playing college basketball that would. I mean, that we have to understand the numbers. If there's 32 teams, 30 teams in the NBA, well, half of them are getting drafted out of Europe, or damn near. So how many are we talking about? So if there's 4 or 5 or 6 guys in a draft that are coming out of college early, it's not watering down college basketball. Trust me. You can't tell me that the Louisville team was watered down. Huh? Come on. That was a really good basketball team, and they played another really good basketball team. So coaches adapt. Their recruiting reflects that they may have a kid on their team who may only be there for 1 or 2 years. They're having conversations with their athletes about what they'd like to do, and in most cases, they're giving them good, sound advice about whether they should come out in the draft or not, so that if they have a sense early enough, they'll recruit accordingly to make sure that they have somebody to replace that young person when they declare for the draft. So I think all that stuff is nonsense. I think the average fan doesn't see any of that. They love the competition that goes on in college, the pageantry of it, the competition, the passion, and yeah, I don't see it being that big a deal.
You know, I agree. Again, the one thing that always comes back to my mind, you know, having represented players as a sports attorney, is that, you know, 2 or 3 hard cases of a kid that, you know, felt like he was good enough to go, didn't go to college, wasted an opportunity to get a free education and be able to do something else positive in life. But I agree, the competition is still great. You know, I think, you know, in some instances, kids leaving early create more parity. When schools like Butler can keep their players for 4 years, or VCU can keep their players for 4 years, develop and really mold themselves into a better team unit, they've got a chance to go much further into the tournament. So, I mean, you can really look at it, you know, either way. But again, you know, I agree with Peter that, you know, every young person that has a skill and a talent to go be able to earn a living should have that right. But again, you know, if you're an owner, you know, one of the things you would love to do is be able to see and watch a player develop before you make a large or huge investment, rather than always have to draft on potential and potential upside, which is what we oftentimes find ourselves doing now.
The professionals would love for us to invest those monies for 4 years before they have to invest. The training room, the weight room, the nutritionist, the yoga,
All of that.
Peter, you mentioned the spiraling of the television rights in college sports. Fred, you made reference to figuring out the salary cap strategy, all of which is a long way of saying that so much of sports is about big money these days, and you hear fans and plenty of people that are in sports lament that. But I was hoping maybe the two of you could talk just a little bit about how you balance the money side with the competitive side and the ethical side.
Well, you know, at our level at Northeastern, we don't make any bones about the fact that we're not making money. And, you know, I think that's important for most people to appreciate, is that there's a handful of colleges and universities that are playing collegiate athletics that are actually turning a profit. And that if they're not being subsidized by the institution, that the revenues that they're generating are just offsetting the expense. And almost no one is making big money. So that's why we have to be careful when we talk about institutions making a lot of money and why kids don't get paid to play. The institutions aren't making a lot of money. They're spending that money on the breadth of their athletic program, so that all the other sports can travel and have uniforms and have coaches and strength and conditioning coaches and facilities and sports psychologists and all that sort of stuff. So at our level, what we're trying to do is, how can we generate enough revenue to take some pressure off the institution's need to fund our program, so that that money can go to other things within the institution that are priorities. I mean, one of the decisions that I had to make 3 years ago is I discontinued the football program at Northeastern after 74 years. And you know, the questions were, was this a Title IX issue? Was it a money issue? No and no. It had nothing to do with Title IX, and it had nothing to do about the amount of money we were currently spending to support the football program. But it did have to do with, when you tried to figure out how could you make that program more competitive so that those student athletes could have a better, positive student athlete experience, it became clear that our facility was not up to par with those we were competing against. And so we weren't recruiting the highest level player. So when I evaluated the program, I said, okay, what do we need? $20 to $25 million to upgrade the facility. Now, you have to ask yourself, is that the best use of money for the institution, regardless of whether it goes to athletics or something else? And I couldn't in good conscience say that that was the best use of the money. So if that's not going to be the option, then it didn't seem like the status quo was appropriate. And so that's where you try to balance the monies invested with what's in the best interest of the institution and being competitive. That all kind of came together in that example.